starting this fall, we have an adult faith formation series. There'll be 6 talks starting September 12th and ending December 5th. And the talks are interconnected. So they aren't just different talks, but they're all interconnected. And they're all about the topic of forming our conscience or discerning, practicing our faith in a world of gray. And they'll cover a whole bunch of topics. We're hoping and presuming that most of them will be held in Fromm Hall in person, but 2 will be have to be Zoomed because they're coming from New York. Jim Martin is going to do one, and then Lisa Fulham is going to do one, and she's on sabbatical in New York, but all the rest will be in person. A good roster of people, and that'll start on September 12th. I'll give the first talk on discernment and how you do it and why it's important. Okay. Now I turn to Tom Rees.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the introduction and the invitation to be here with the St. Ignatius community again. I always enjoy coming here in the summer, and I was disappointed last year when I couldn't come because of COVID. So hopefully things will get better, although things don't look so good. But in any case, thank you, and thanks to Robert for all his technical support on this. You mentioned Jim Martin. I'm delighted to hear that he's going to be speaking. I take full credit for starting Jim on his career, because when I was editor of America Magazine,
Yes.
I hired him, and it was probably the best thing I did while I was editor.
I can't do it with one hand.
Folks, just a quick, sorry to interrupt, a quick reminder that if you could please use your microphone, turn your microphones off until the end of the program if you're asking a question. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. So my presentation today is about Catholics and climate change. Unlike John, I've had difficulty writing about this. In some ways, it just seems so damned obvious. Just do it. But I think we have to do a little more thinking about it and talking about it, because clearly it's not obvious to everybody in our country or the world. And so I think we as Catholics need to take leadership on this. Certainly, Pope Francis has been providing great leadership on this topic with his encyclical Laudato Si. So my presentation today is going to be taking a little quick look at Laudato Si, and then talk about, okay, how should we respond, and the need for both personal and systemic conversion and responding to climate change. Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, presents his thinking about the environment and climate change in 6 extraordinary chapters. And of course, I can only give a very brief look at each of them in the time that we have today. But this is an encyclical that is really worth reading and meditating on, and having discussion groups about this encyclical. So the chapters are what's happening to our common home. Then he talks about the gospel of creation, then the human roots of the ecological crisis. Then he talks about integral ecology, and then how to approach this and actions we can take. And then he talks about the need for an ecological education and spirituality. So first of all, what's happening to our common home? What's amazing about this encyclical, it's probably the first encyclical that begins with, what is science telling us? Usually encyclicals begin with, theology, with the Bible and Thomas Aquinas and all that. But Pope Francis begins with, what is science telling us? And this really connects to his own personal background, because he was trained as a scientist before he entered the seminary. So before he had any philosophical or theological training, he was first trained as a scientist. And so he takes science very seriously. It's the first pope we've had with a science background. And what is science telling us? It's telling us about the pollution that we have, the waste that we have that comes from our throwaway culture. The amount of trash we create, the amount of pollution we create through our throwaway culture is just extraordinary. Mountains, tons of it, hundreds of tons, millions of tons of it that we create from our throwaway culture that we have. Science is also telling us that this is all destroying the ecosystems that the world is based on. It's showing that all of this pollution and destruction is resulting in a decline in biodiversity. Species are just being killed off, every day throughout the world, whether there's insects, birds, animals, fish, all kinds of biodiversity is being lessened because of the pollution and destruction that we're doing. And then science is also telling us of the climate change that is happening. This is a scientific fact. It's not an opinion. It's not something that you can, you can feel about it or have an opinion on. This is science. This is fact that climate change is happening. There's no doubt about this whatsoever. And so we have to take it seriously. We have to look at the consequences of climate change. What is happening to our world because of climate change? And of course, we see it, we're seeing it right here in California with, it's still cold and foggy in San Francisco, but in the rest of the world, it's getting hotter than hell. Our friends who live up in the Northwest and Portland and places like that have experienced the hottest weather they've ever seen. We're seeing water shortages. Now that we are really seeing both in San Francisco and throughout California. The fires that we're having, the wind is blowing towards the east, so we're not getting the smoke that we have had so badly in the past. But the fires are just ripping through California because we've had so little rain, because the heat is up, and because the soil and the forests have become so dry. We're also seeing rise in sea levels that we're having. You can go online and see the projections on where the San Francisco Bay is going to be if the tide keeps rising. And we've seen disruption in the ecosystems, in the world through climate change. It is part of what's causing the destruction of ecosystems. One of the things we don't notice so much that's happening because of climate change is the acidification of the oceans. What this means is there is more and more carbon going into the oceans, and so the oceans are becoming more acidic, more acid. And this is not good for coral. This is really bad for coral because coral is made up of living plankton and carbon-based creatures that are being, that are having a hard time reproducing. And we see coral reefs, the great coral reefs off Australia are dying. And coral reefs are where they're the biological nurseries of the oceans. And if they die off, we're in real trouble. Say goodbye to fish. Say goodbye to the life that we have in the oceans. Even off our coast here, the kelp beds are dying off. Part of it is the destruction, then the death and the dying off of starfish that feed on sea urchins. And the result is the sea urchins were going crazy, were reproducing and not being suppressed, and they were killing off the kelp beds. And so, and again, the kelp beds are where the fish breed and the small fish live, and the great life of the oceans off our California coasts is in the kelp beds, and these are being destroyed. They're they're just being totally wiped out, and we have to do something about this. We also see a decline in the quality of life. And we see this in the great heat that is going on, places that have, never worried about air conditioning, never had it. Suddenly, in the Northwest, where you never thought you needed air conditioning, it's getting over 100-degree weather they've never seen before. It's a decline in the quality of life. In fact, more people die of heat stroke than die from tornadoes and hurricanes and all of those kinds of weather events. Heat kills people in cities all over the world, and it's very destructive. And this heat is also going to cause a decline in society. We're going to see a breakdown in human society because of the heat, the climate change. And all of this is going to make global inequalities worse. We all know the global inequality that we have, but poor countries are going to suffer more from these kinds of inequality from climate change than anything else. And of course, we're seeing that during the COVID pandemic. We're already seeing the kinds of inequalities that are going to get worse and worse around the world through climate change and these kinds of things. Because the gravest effects of climate change are on the poor. Now, one of the things that Pope Francis talks about is the ecological debt that the first world owes the third world, the developing world, because we historically have polluted and caused more carbon dioxide to go into the atmosphere than anybody else. It's the first world, through our industrial revolution, through the 20th century and into now, we are pumping more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, more methane gases into the atmosphere than anybody else. So we have, created this ecological debt that we owe the rest of the world. And the debt is being called in. It's our responsibility to pay up for this debt. Okay, so that is, Pope Francis telling us what science teaches. Then he goes into talking about theology and talking about the Bible. And what does the Bible tell us about creation? And so he talks about the gospel of creation. And what we learn from the Bible is that creation is God's gift. God's showing us his love. Creation comes out of the love of God. It's God's gift to us. And also we learn that God loves creation. And if this is true, if it's God's gift, if it's something that's loved by God, well, we should not be destroying it. We should not be defacing it. And it also talks about how creation reveals God's image. And in other words, creation is an icon. It's like an icon of the saints or of Christ. And to deface an icon is a sacrilege. So to deface creation is a sacrilege in the mind of Pope Francis. And what else does the Bible teach us about creation? It teaches us that God created the world for everybody. And therefore there are, creation is something that the poor have a right to. There are rights of the poor and underprivileged to creation. So what is, well, but what's that say about private property then? Well, what the Bible and Catholic social teaching tells us is that that the right to private property is not absolute. It's mine, I can do whatever I want with it. No, that is not what the Bible says. That is not what Catholic theology says. The natural environment is a collective good. It's the patrimony of all humanity. It is owned by all of humanity. And it is the responsibility of everyone to protect the natural environment. If we make something our own, through private property, it is only to administer it for the good of all. Now, this goes against everything we've ever been told about private property and our right to do whatever we please with what we own. No, not true, according to the Bible or according to Catholic social teaching. Even if we own something, we only administer it for the common good of humanity. Pope Francis also talks about justice in terms of between generations. And he asks, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to the children who are growing up now, to our grandchildren? What kind of world are we going to leave them? A lot of parents and grandparents, try and make a lot of money so they can leave it to their kids so that they have a head start in the world. Well, if we are destroying the world, if we are destroying creation, then we are really leaving our children and grandchildren a mess. Pope Francis says he believes in these doomsday predictions. We may well be leaving to coming generations debris, desolation, and filth. So this is what our a theological reflection on what the science is telling us brings us to this kind of responsibility, our obligation and justice to future generations. Now, in the next chapter, he looks at what are the human roots of the ecological crisis. And basically, it's putting together human greed and technology. I mean, we've always had human greed. We've always had human beings doing stupid things. But you put together stupidity and technology, and that is disaster, is basically what he's saying. We couldn't, earlier generations couldn't destroy the earth. They might cause a fire, they might burn down the forest, but 20, 30 years, the forest grows back. But what technology is enabling us to do is to do permanent damage to our environment. If we destroy the chemistry of the oceans, that's going to take a millennia to recover from it. So the technology and greed are at the roots of the disaster we have today. It's also a result of kind of the practical relativism that we have, that it's me, me, me. It's all about me and what's good for me, and to hell with everybody else. Finally, there's also the problem of we have this belief in unlimited growth based on a limitless world and earthly goods that we have, that we have this unlimited supply that nature gives us, unlimited trees, unlimited fish, unlimited oil, unlimited oxygen, all of this. We have it, and we can just use it for unlimited growth. It ain't so anymore. This simply is not the world we live in anymore. So in his fourth chapter, he talks about integral ecology. Basically, he says that environmental issues cannot be understood as separate from economic, political, and cultural issues. These all fit together help us understand what is happening, why climate change is happening. We need more than just economics. We need more than just politics and culture. We need all of these together to help us understand, and we have to have this holistic view to understand what's happening in the world. And we have to reflect with theology and with ethics on these issues, because they are truly ethical, moral issues. What we are doing to the world is a moral issue. So then how do we approach this? How do we respond to climate change and the environmental crisis that we're in? Pope Francis makes the issue, makes the point that our response is not just as individuals, but it's also political, social, and cultural. This is not a crisis that we can solve simply by each individual trying to do something. We have to work together through politics, through society, and we have to change our culture. This is extremely important. For Francis, politics must not be subjected to economics. We see this so much in the world today, in our own country, where economics determines what politicians do. Who has the most money, who makes the biggest contributions, whose jobs are in my district. If it's an oil district, well, too bad for climate change, because my people want jobs. Economics cannot determine politics. This is simply not the way the world can be run anymore. What he encourages is dialogue, and we have to have dialogue on a national and international level. We have to have dialogue in our country where all of the people have to be brought to the table to discuss what we are going to do as a country to respond to climate change. And we have to do this on the international level. And of course, this was done with the Paris Accords. And this fall, there will be another meeting in Scotland talking about what the world has to do to respond to climate change. If we don't respond soon and now, it's going to be too late. So the dialogue has to lead to a common plan for the common good of the world to deal with climate change. It's going to have to lead to regulations. Yes, regulations. Government regulations are good sometimes. They can be stupid, but they also can be good because they have to deal with the environment and the environmental impact of business and market forces. We cannot let the market run wild anymore. We have to regulate it so it doesn't make climate change worse. We have to have regulations in order to have a sustainable use of our natural resources. This is what dialogue should lead to, a plan for sustainable use of natural resources, whether it's, fish, oxygen, air, oil, all of the things, water, the things that we cannot survive without. We have to also have dialogue lead to a reverse of the disparities between the excessive technological investment in consumption and insufficient investment in resolving the urgent problems facing the human family. This is especially for the developing world, where our economy is all based on consumption. When we stop consuming, the economists and the policymakers get nervous. Remember when President Bush said, "Go out there and consume." Excuse me. That might be good in the short term, but in the long term, we have to protect the environment, and we cannot consume ourselves into a better world. So dialogue is going to have to lead to setting some reasonable limits to growth and even retracing our steps before it's too late. there's going to have to be decreased growth in some parts of the world in order to provide the resources for other places to experience healthy growth. These are all of the points that Pope Francis makes in his encyclical. These are the things he's calling us to think about. These are real challenges to us who live in the first world, who live in the United States of America. We have to redefine our notion of progress. GDP is not everything. Our bank book is not everything. The stock market is not everything. A technological and economic development that does not leave in its wake a better world and integrally higher quality of life cannot be considered progress. And this has to be for everybody. Francis argues that halfway measures simply delay the inevitable. We have to go full speed ahead on dealing with climate change. Finally, Pope Francis talks about the need for an ecological spirituality. Our spirituality, really has to change and take into serious consideration the world we live in today. That means, a spirituality that leads to a simpler lifestyle where less is more. It also means a spirituality that leads to a prophetic lifestyle, a lifestyle that challenges the culture in which we live. If you're not leading a life that says to your neighbors, hey, what are you up to? Why are you doing that? Then you're not living a prophetic lifestyle, a lifestyle that challenges the culture in which we live. It also means a spirituality that leads to a contemplative lifestyle, a lifestyle that's capable of deep enjoyment, free of obsessing with consumption. A lifestyle that has a capacity for wonder, a spirituality that leads us to wonder and takes us into a deep understanding of life. A lifestyle that's able to say, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to spend anything. I can just sit in a forest. I can just sit in my background. I can just sit in a park and wonder at God's creation and the beauty of it. I don't have to consume. Pope Francis says that this kind of a spirituality is not optional or a secondary aspect of our Christian experience. It's at the heart of what it means to be a Christian today in our modern world. So Pope Francis talks and encourages us to an ecological conversion, an awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but joined in a splendid universal communion with all of nature. That each creature reflects something of God and a message, and has a message to convey to us. And that's why it is such a tragedy when species are going out of existence every day. And because they teach us what it is, what God is. So finally, Pope Francis puts us to the question, how do we respond? He says that we have to respond as individuals and institutionally. We have to reduce our carbon footprint. We have to recycle. We have, and actually this will save us money. And we have to do this as individuals, and we have to do this as institutions. The church, has property all over this country and the world. They are, as an institution, as a Catholic Church, we're a big consumer of carbon. Well, we got to have you know, we have to have solar panels on all our roofs. We have to reduce the amount of carbon we create. We have to say, okay, Father, okay, Pastor, it's okay if our parish church is warmer in the summer and cooler in the winter. All of these things we have to do. We have to have efforts at recycling. We have to know how to recycle. We have to do these things the right way. All of this kind of thing we have to do as individuals and as institutions. We have to also change our educational systems and way we educate our children and way we educate people in schools. We need scholars and intellectuals like John Coleman who talk about these things, give an intellectual foundation to what, and a theological foundation to what's going on, so that we can change our culture. All of this has to be multidisciplinary. It's not just a science, it's not just economics, it's all of academic world working together. And it has to be spiritual. We have to figure out how to work this into our spirituality, into the way we pray, into the way we do retreats, into the way we celebrate liturgy, so that this environmental spirituality is celebrated by us liturgically and spiritually. And finally, it has to be political action, because systems must change. The way we produce electricity, the way we drive, the way we transport ourselves, all of these systems have to change if we are not going to destroy our world. And so we have to work together politically through, action groups, through political parties, through voting, the way we act. All of this has to put the environment and global warming as a priority in our politics. So here, let me give you some resources that I think can be helpful to you. First of all, of course, the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si. All you have to do is put that into Google and you'll find the text of his encyclical, which is free to download from the Vatican website and from other sites. I also did a reader's guide to Laudato Si, so you can use that as you're reading along. It's something you can use in discussion groups. And again, all you have to do is put Reader's Guide to Laudato Si into Google and it'll pop up. It's at the National Catholic Reporter's website. And it's, again, is a free download. They were disappointed that they made it free because thousands of copies of it have been downloaded, but I'm delighted that it's free. And finally, there's also a movement that you can join, the Laudato Si movement, which used to be known as the Catholic Climate Movement. It just changed its name last week to the Laudato Si movement. And again, you can just type that into Google. But you can go there and see other Catholics that are working together, and they have lots of wonderful suggestions about what you can do as an individual, as groups, what you can do politically. And your own parish has a Laudato Si circle, and you can find out how to join that by going to the parish website and get involved and get together there. And there's lots of things, even, I was just reading about it last week in the newspaper, how there's a bill in the state legislature right now that is being opposed by the plastic companies. But it's a great idea. Those triangles, with the little arrows that you see on all the plastic? Well, it's a bunch of nonsense, because most of those plastics with those triangles on them, you cannot recycle. And in fact, if you throw them into the recycling bin, they will just cause all sorts of trouble. The classic example of that is the plastic bag. do not throw that into the recycle bin because it clogs up the machinery. It's one of the worst things you can throw into the recycle bin. But they put that stupid triangle on it and because they want to pretend it's recyclable because they like producing it and they're making money off it. We got to get those triangles off those plastics that are really not recyclable because they're simply lying to us, so that we know what's really recyclable and what is not. And so this is something that's really, something that's a local political issue right now up in Sacramento at the state office. So I want to thank you for your paying so much attention to this. How many Jesuits does it take to change a light bulb? That's a cartoon that the National Catholic Reporter did when I wrote a column about that. I was changing all the light bulbs in our house to LED light bulbs, which allowed us to cut down our carbon footprint and actually allowed us to save a lot of money because we were using less electricity. So these are some of the things we have to think about, some of the things we need to do. But now I'm going to open it up, and I want to hear your suggestions on, what are the things you've been doing? What are the things that you think we should be doing as a church, as individuals, and as, and through our political system. So thank you very much for paying so much attention to everything I've had to say. And Robert, I'll let you pick up the people with hands up who have either questions or comments and things to contribute.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your presentation, Father Reese. I think you forgot to deliver the punchline on the joke about how many Jesuits does it take a light bulb. Isn't it something to do with discernment?
Actually, it depends what province they're from.
I thought it was how long it takes them to discern it or something like that. That's funny. Great. So let's go to Q&A. Thank you for those of you who have raised your hands. Victor, I'm going to unmute you and you can go ahead and ask your question.
It looks like he's still muted.
Who?
Victor, you need to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. Yes, thank you. And thank you, Father, for your presentation. Let me lower my hand. Okay, there you go. Father, the challenges that the pandemic has brought about provides, I think, lessons learned and best practices to deal with the climate change. But as you know, Father, that a third of the United States is still not vaccinated, and a third refuse to vaccinate for whatever reason. And politicians are divided as well. And so the same problems of trying to convince people about the science of climate change, about the horrors that climate change would bring about how to deal with it and all that, seems to also be reflected in the pandemic that we're experiencing right now. Even though the pandemic has already given us some sense of a simpler lifestyle and more care for the climate and all. So I was wondering, Father, can your group or staff be able to get lessons learned and best practices through this ongoing COVID pandemic to try to apply those lessons learned and best practices to the climate crisis? Thank you.
That's a great question, Victor, and I agree totally with your points. I mean, we see I think the same problem of convincing people with science, of the science that shows climate change. We have the same problems there as we have convincing people of the COVID crisis and the great risk that is there, and convincing people that what they need to do is get vaccinated. I mean, we doctors are telling us about people on their deathbed still saying they don't believe that we have a pandemic going on, you know.
And even in the fires, you know, they are being faced with people with guns, you know, who try to rescue them. So how can we apply, Father, the lessons learned and best practices that are still ongoing with the COVID pandemic and the vaccines? How do we apply that to the climate crisis and the things that we can do, as you mentioned, as the Pope mentioned, individually, politically, socially, and culturally? You know, hit all those 4 points. You know, try to mimic the two parallel. Thank you,
Yeah,
Father.
the honest answer is I'm not sure. I think what COVID has shown us is, you know, nature doesn't get our attention until people are dying
Right.
in great numbers.
Right.
It kind of reminds me of the Vietnam War. You know, we didn't get out of the Vietnam War until the body bags just kept coming back in greater and greater numbers, and we finally said enough is enough. I think that you know, we don't see the climate crisis as a crisis. You know, I mean, look what we were able to do in response. You know, we haven't been perfect in our response to COVID, but we've done a lot. I mean, we shut down the economy. We caused a recession because of COVID. Now, COVID caused the recession, but you know, we had to do some things in order to, you know, protect lives. But we were willing to do that to protect lives. You know, if we were willing to do that to respond to COVID, which was causing hundreds of thousands of deaths, are we willing to do that to respond to the climate crisis, which is going to cause millions and millions of deaths, perhaps even hundreds of millions of deaths? You know, when oceans rise, when the Gulf Stream changes its course, when you know, when we can no longer grow things in California because there's no water left, we're going to see a refugee crisis like we've never seen before. But we don't see it right now, so we don't believe it. We're not willing to make the sacrifices to do something about it. I'm very pessimistic, to be perfectly honest with you. As a social scientist, I have to be optimistic. I have to be a person of hope because I'm a Christian. But I'm very discouraged about our possibility of taking climate change seriously. I just have to say, and frankly, I'm hoping to hear from some of you some hope and some courage in some ways that we can respond to this crisis. I think, you know, the scientists are telling us, use less energy. The economists are telling us, put a tax on carbon. There's not a politician in Washington that wants to put a tax on carbon.
Father Reese, let me jump in because we have a number of other questions. So, and I think
go.
No, to your point about taking action, I want to call on Mary Rose LeBaron, who heads up our Laudato Si Circle.
Oh, wonderful, good.
You just dropped the link in the chat box for anyone who wants to join. I'm sure she's going to talk a little bit about that. Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me okay today?
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for taking such strong words with us today and showing us the urgency of this crisis, Father Reese. It's really appreciated. I will try to be brief. I think I wanted to talk about the plastic bag situation, there is a great suggestion, and I'm doing it at home. I've bought a box from an organization called Terra Cycle, Terra Cycle, CYCLE. And you pay them, and you then collect all your bread bags. So from my kitchen, you know, I can't avoid plastic. But then I collect all my bread bags and things that come wrapped in plastic. I put it in this box, and then you send it back to them, and they will properly take care of plastic film. Okay, that's suggestion number one. Suggestion number two, let's afflict our comfortableness in our homes. Stop being too comfortable. Pick up the phone and call your politicians and tell them we have to keep fossil fuels in the ground. Guess what? Jackie Spear, my congressperson, she does support a carbon tax. There's a carbon fee and dividend piece of legislation, and we can get behind it. So many resources, you guys, on the Laudato Si Circles page at St. Ignatius Parish. Come talk to our circles. We would love to help you activate and get out of your comfort zone. Thank you so much, Father Reese. I've done my plug.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you so much. You know, the other thing you can do with plastic bags is use them as pooper scoopers. if you've got a dog or have a friend who has a dog, why buy, you know, these plastic bags from Petco, you know, when you can just use the plastic bags that you have in your home or that your friends have.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Father Coleman, I saw you were waving your hand. Did you want to jump in?
Well, I guess I wanted to ask you what you think will come from the Glasgow meeting. By the way, somebody had wondered about whether the Vatican had signed the Paris Accords. The answer is yes. And in fact, Laudato Si was written in order to help the Paris Accord. But I want to ask you, what do you expect is going to happen in Glasgow in October? Because that's an important step forward in terms of the Paris Accords.
You know, that's going to be really interesting. I think, you know, with the new administration, at least we have an administration that supports the Paris Accord as opposed to the previous administration. So that's really good. I mean, so that, you know, the United States is on at least the right side. I think that though we need to go farther, you know, than most politicians are willing to do. And the only way that's going to happen is if the public rises up and says, we want more. We want you to do more. Because, you know, politicians respond to what their voters want because they're worried about the next election. And we have to have a groundswell, a grassroots movement around the world that says it's time to change and that we are willing to make the sacrifices that are necessary to change. Otherwise, you know, they'll do their little bit, but it's, you know, I'm afraid it's really getting to a breaking point. You know, they're talking about, you know, reducing the amount of carbon we're putting into the air. We have to get down to zero really quick. In fact, I think we have to get to the point where we're taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting into it, or we're going to see ecological disaster before the end of the century.
Well, just on that point, you know, the aim was nothing more than 1.5 increase, you know, Celsius increase. We're already 2, and it looks like almost 3 if we don't start doing something. So it really is calling for drastic action, not just little dinky things. Anyway.
Yeah.
Great. So next up, Mary Click. You want to go ahead and unmute?
We can't hear her.
You need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I had.
There you go.
First of all, thank you for taking my question, or not so much question as a comment, I think. And I want to give a plug to the Laudato Si group in our parish. It's it's really important that if you want to take steps in this direction, it can help to be in a community that shares those values. So kudos to Laudato Si, kudos to Pope Francis, kudos to St. Ignatius. I'm a big tree lover. I've got I'm growing a tree right in my living room. I think that we need to give a better spin to the word sacrifice. I was thinking about historically in our country, World War II, we sacrificed like crazy so that people could have rubber, so that there could be rubber available, nylon available, we make, steel, whatever it was, but people sacrificed. They gave up their butter, their milk, or whatever it was, so that a higher cause was possible. Somehow or other, we are losing that ability to spin this in a way that it is a higher cause and that we can do this and we need to do this. And somehow there's a good that's going to come out of this that is bigger than all of us. And I don't know any way except just to do it. So I think there's a sense of, for me anyway, the word sacrifice has got to be in your own heart a good thing, not a hard thing. That's something that's it's a good thing to do, and start small and just stick at it. And that's all I'm going to say.
Terrific. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Next up, we have Alejandro and then Jeffrey.
Thank you. My question, Father, is, first of all, thank you for your presentation. My question has to do with nature. You mentioned in the part of the Laudato Si ecological spirituality that we focus on the simplicity and the simple things of life. And Mary Clip just showed you her tree. And it's going to take years, given that the church takes years to move as well. How do you see Pope Francis's direction in relation to humanity, since he is a global pope, thank God, looking at what other nations around the world are encompassing with the pandemic? How do you see the vision, Father Tom, of his leadership for us as Christians and as humans going forward?
Thank you for that question. I think that Pope Francis really recognizes that we are a world church. We're not a European church. We're not a white church. We're a world church. And that we're all brothers and sisters in this world together, living in God's creation that is God's gift to us, to all of us, not just to those who were born into the, better circumstances. He has this great affection for the poor and the marginalized. And I think that this is part of his motivation in terms of the environment, in terms of climate change, because he sees how this is impacting the whole world. So I think he's really providing, world leadership on this. It is so good to see religion on the right side of history for a change. It's so good to see religion on the right side of science for a change. And, I think that religion is one of the few things that can call people to sacrifice, as our earlier speaker was saying. Religion can get people to do things that they normally would not do, to get outside their own individual space, to sacrifice for the common good. I think of those people in the Middle Ages who, the first shovel of dirt to build a cathedral that they would never see completed, their children would never see completed, but they were willing to make the sacrifices to do that. You know, that's the kind of mindset, you know, as was said, the mindset of the people, you know, our earlier generation, our parents and grandparents who gave up and sacrificed so much during the Second World War. We need to do that. We need to have that spirituality. And I think that's what Pope Francis is calling us to.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 2 questions left in about 5 minutes. So we'll take these 2 questions, and we'll start with Jeff Johnson calling in from Boston, and then we'll go to Kate for the last question.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Father Tom. I'm a philosophy professor, and I specialize in ethics and political philosophy. And you definitely brought something up that touches on one of my concerns. I love democracy. I believe in human rights. But it seems to me there is something weak at the heart of our liberal democratic systems that makes it difficult for them to respond to human crisis. We saw this in the 1930s with the rise of fascism. And I'm worried, I'm worried about that we're seeing the same thing again, that we can't seem to summon up the will necessary to deal with these various crises. Because I see them all related, the political crisis, the economic crisis, the environmental crisis, they're all basic faces of the same malaise. What do you think about that, Father?
I'm afraid I agree with you. Yeah, it is really very discouraging, very worrying. We see the rise of authoritarian regimes around the world. We see the rise of this kind of nationalism around the world. We see the rise of leaders who are saying there is an enemy at the gates and we have to deal with them, and you know, there's somebody we can blame for all of our problems, not ourselves, of course, but there's somebody that we can blame. These are all the kinds of things that scare me. You know, and we've seen a little bit of that from COVID. We've seen that from the migration, refugee crisis. Climate change is going to put that on steroids. You know, we'll have machine guns at the border shooting people who want to come into our enclave. You know, it's going to get ugly. You know, it's a wonder that young people like apocalyptic movies so much, and so much of science fiction today is apocalyptic. I can't stand that kind of literature or movies because I think it's too real. It's too much of what I worry about. You know, give me the Hallmark Channel. You know, I want a happy ending. But I worry that this is the world we're leaving for our children and grandchildren. It scares the hell out of me. And I think if we look at the political situation around the world, it's scary. And if we, the greatest democracy in the world, cannot deal with climate change, you know, and if we do it as badly as we're dealing with COVID, then there is no hope for democracy.
So I know Kate is going to bring us home with a super positive question to wrap up the discussion today. Kate, go for it. No pressure.
Go.
Hi guys. Thanks. I know that I could talk about this for a long time. But Father, I saw thanks to Mary Rose for sending this out to us through the Laudato Si Circle, but an article that you wrote in Earthbeat just a couple of days ago. And it was a really striking thought that you put out there about how to use Catholic guilt to motivate us as a group, and how that used to be such a powerful motivator. We haven't relied on that for some time, but it also
Clerical power.
but also woven within it, what struck me was that, you mentioned about how the youth are driving the crusade. And what my question is how, from, not just the context of this article, but in general, in talking with children about this crisis, should we use guilt? Or should we use the other examples that are out in the world? Or how can we talk to them to not completely discourage them from being the future leaders we need them to be?
Well, I'm not sure Catholic guilt has worked. I mean, if it works, use it. Well, that's my attitude. I'm very pragmatic in my approach to things. I think for some people, guilt will work. For some people, fear will work. For some people, altruism will work. Hey, whatever works, use it, is my attitude here. I think, as I said in my homily today, some people are good because they fear that they're going to be punished by God. Some people are good because it makes them feel good about themselves being good. Other people are good because, they've experienced love and they just want to share this love with other people. I think we got to take people where they are. So the first thing we need to do is listen to people. I think this is one of the problems also in our society today, is that we have too many people like myself who are preaching and not enough people who are listening. And I think before we can preach, before we can change people's attitudes, we can't just yell at them and say, "You're so stupid, you should be doing this." We have to first sit down and listen to them and listen to their concerns and, maybe just say, "Well, have you thought about this?" Or "Why is it that you think that?" This is one of the things Pope Francis does. This is what he calls synodality. It's walking together with people, listening to their concerns. And sometimes, when you're walking, you're at the head of the pack. Sometimes you're in the middle of the pack, and sometimes you're the back of the pack pushing. But I'm not, whatever it is, I think we have to listen to people, take people where they are, and encourage them. They will listen to you if they think you love them. If they think they're idiots and look down with contempt on them, they aren't going to listen to you. So the first thing you got to do is show people that you love them. Then they might listen.
Great. And what a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Father Reese. If everyone could join me in giving a virtual round of applause with our hand clap emoji there. And thank you, Father Reese, for both of the sessions that you did with us. The previous one on President Biden. I think, just judging by the numbers here, it's something you're always welcome at St. Ignatius. I think you know that. And we really appreciate you being here and sharing your thoughts with us. Again, I want to encourage everyone on the call today to please join us for our Laudato Si Circle. It meets twice a month. And really, if you want to take action on these issues, Mary Rose has a whole host of things that she shares with the group every few weeks. And then finally, as Father John Coleman mentioned, we have our Conscious Formation series coming up this fall, which will really carry on the conversations that Father Reese helped sort of kick off here this summer, with a number of really sort of relevant issues that we all grapple with within our faith and our religion. So thank you so much for being here today. I hope everyone has a wonderful Sunday. Thank you, Father Coleman. And thank you all for your questions. They were all great.
Thank you so much. I feel much more hopeful now after this